Are you ready, Chris?
It's so
Is it live? Okay. All right, we're going to begin the meeting, April 9th, the County Board of Water.
You got it.
Wow. All right, please note that the meeting is being recorded for live streaming and also for being available on our website at a later date. As all the public had an opportunity to sign in, there's a sign-in sheet there. Going to review the agenda first, and are there any changes, positions, corrections by you? Will there be any executive session? No executive session. She said no. All right. Minutes from March 26th.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes from March.
All right. Motion made and seconded. Any further questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I was not here.
Abstaining to it.
2 abstentions. Okay. Passed. All right. At this time, we open up the floor to the public. If you have any comments of the non-agenda items, if it's an agenda item, you can have a chance during that time when we discuss it for you to
You have to pass
add.
the cookies.
And keep the cookies down. All right. Was there any public non-agenda items? Yes. Go ahead.
It's a hodgepodge issue, so I don't know if it fits with the agenda or not, so.
Could you state your name and?
Joe Hilliard, I'm Allentown resident. Basically, looking over some of the financial statements, it looks like the LCA is making interest-only payments on the city division financing. And in fact, it actually looks like you're deferring even those payments. Otherwise, I can't figure out why are interest payments booked as a positive number in cash flow calculations. Are you actually even deferring just the interest-only payments?
I will answer that. No, you're not, we are making interest-only payments, so you picked that up correctly. And the truth of the matter is that's a deduction from cash flow. It's not a positive number, it's a deduction from cash flow. So if you had $1 million of cash available for debt service, and debt service was interest-only, and that was $13 million, which is what it runs about a year, then you would have that minus $13 million in cash flow.
The 2017 end-of-year financial report shows it as a positive number, which is baffling.
The 2017 year-end shows what is a positive number?
Interest payments.
No, that would be a negative number. Because you're making a debt service payment and you're deducting from cash flow. I mean, you might be picking on a line item that's adjusting for non-cash interest.
Well, that's the term. What exactly is a
Well,
non-cash interest payment?
Understand that, okay, I'll explain that to you. Understand that in bonds, there's an actual payment to the bank that we make twice a year, which will total about $13+ million. We also have amortization of bond premium, which gets included in interest expense. Amortization of bond premium is taking the premium that was given to us on the bonds back at closing and taking that over a period of 50 years. So that's getting included as well. There is appreciation on some of the liabilities, more particularly the liability related to the annual lease premium, because that's put on the balance sheet. I know I'm going to get way too technical and probably scare everybody with this, but it's put on the balance sheet as a liability and a net present value discounted over 50 years. Yeah, so there are in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million, depending on your rounding, of what we would call non-cash items that flow through interest expense that are actually not paid to the trustee.
It's not too technical for me, so.
So, sorry.
I'm going to have to schedule a meeting with you because I want that broken down in detail, because that's not what's reflected in the cash flow report. Secondly, this board approved the financing for the ludicrously irresponsible city water deal 4 years beyond the charter. Could somebody explain how that's even legal?
The financing for the lease is through 2047. Our charter ends currently in 2049.
I was given a different number.
I don't know who gave you that number, but
Okay.
our lease, our repayment schedule is through 2047.
Okay, I'll check that out, thank you.
Mhm.
Last year you submitted a, I don't know if this is how you pronounce it, but WIFIA letter, the EPA program. You submitted a letter of interest. Did you also apply that year, and was it denied, was your application denied because it wasn't listed as one of the approved projects? And if so, why?
The WIPIA program, we did submit a letter of interest and we were not invited to actually apply.
Okay, okay, excellent. Now, I'm not even gonna get into this issue, this will come out over the next several months. I do have a right to know here, though, request, and there's no right to know officer listed, so I just made it out to the chairman of the board, if I may. Chairman Howell. There you go, it says it's addressed to you, care of. Thank you.
I'll just pass this on.
Sure, thank you very much. All right, that's it for me.
Okay, any other public have any comments on the non-agenda items? All right, we'll have other opportunities on agenda items to discuss. Action items, we have an overview of the lease agreement, but we also have two other projects, and I'd like to switch the agenda around and do the two projects first before we get into more lengthy discussion on the Allentown water sewer lease overview. So we're going to go right to water. Allentown Division Water Filtration Plant Roof Replacement Phase 2, and that'll be the blue sheets in front of us. By the way, the board had all this information in advance of the meeting for early review.
Okay, Phil is going to give you a brief presentation of this project. This project was as a result of a condition assessment study that was performed as part of our indenture requirements with the city, and it yielded information on roofs that needed to be replaced. So Phil's going to talk about the scope of the project.
Okay, Bill?
Just to give you a more brief background, every year we do, there's an indenture report created for the bonds, and this roof has been identified.
Just speak up a little bit.
Sure, this project has been identified on this annual report, and we did the first phase of the roofs in 2016, and there are about 2 dozen that were completed. And so the report also identified, it took a look at all of our roof systems, and this is the next phase of that assessment that we're going to complete for this project. There are actually 13 systems that they've identified, and we are going to do 10 of those 13 with this project. And so we're going to go through each site quickly and show you, just a brief picture and what the design looks like. So this indicates the 8 different sites that we're talking about, and then there's also 2 at the wastewater plant that we're doing, so that's a total of 10. The 3 remaining are at the water plant, and we're going to do those in the future. So the 19th ward, this is a small booster station in the system, and that's just an aerial and a side view of the station. And that's the first roof that gets done. The first 7 are actually all asphalt shingle roofs. And then the last 3 are modified membrane roofs. So what you're looking at here is just the engineer's little cutaway of the plan for that roof replacement. And that's going to be consistent throughout the presentation. So here's the South Mountain Reservoir Gatehouse that's being done. The same thing as the 19th ward. Again, that's an asphalt. The shot spring is included. And again, that's another asphalt roof. The Halstead pump station. And these are all vintage roofs from the 1950s and before. So the first 3 we talked about actually have some small leaks, and so those were the highest priority. 28th Street, same thing, another asphalt roof. 16th Ward's another booster station. And then the east side Reservoir Gatehouse, that's the last of the asphalt roofs. And the next three are going to be the modified membrane roof systems. You can see how they're flat. That's Huckleberry Ridge Gatehouse. And then there's two at the wastewater treatment plant. It was a boiler addition building and then the odor control building. And again, the phase one took care of a large chunk of the roofs at the wastewater plant. So these are the last two at the wastewater plant that need to be done. So that's just a brief overview of what they look like, where they're at. And again, it's going to be a total of 10 roofs. And this would be something we can check off the inventory report as, showing progress on work being done. So the project was advertised in the beginning of March.
Can I just ask you, when you
Sure.
say the indenture report, can you just elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, Arcadis was hired to, as an independent engineering, opinion about the overall asset condition of the Allentown division.
And that was called the indenture report?
That's what we call it.
Okay, all right, I just want to make
Yeah.
sure.
And to be clear, that's a requirement under the trust indenture
That's
from
what I'm
MIT.
trying
So
to
that's
understand.
submitted
Okay.
annually to MIT.
And that's part of the approval process with Allentown? For projects that we agree
No,
on?
no,
Okay.
it's our own report that we submit to the trustee.
And this is just one project listed among many others.
Okay.
So the project was advertised in the beginning of March. We had the pre-bid, the middle of March. We had, I think, almost 10 people showed up at pre-bid, but only 3 people actually submitted bids. And Alan Kunsman, of Friedensburg, was a little better in the amount of $309,925. And you can see all 3 bids were relatively, pretty small range. So with that being said, I am requesting a capital plan authorization in the amount of $356,325. And that includes the contract to Alan Kiesman in the amount of $309,925. And that also includes a professional services authorization to Dewey, our engineer, to perform the inspection and construction administration in the amount of $21,400. And this project is anticipated to be complete over the summer of 2018. And again, after this, if it gets approved, we'll have 3 roofs left to do the water plant. Any questions?
Back there.
The board gets to talk first. I'll give you a chance.
I just have a question. Why didn't the other 7 attendees put a bid in?
It could have been schedule conflicts.
Busy? Okay.
What kind of equipment is generally inside these buildings that we're really trying to protect?
The small boosters have booster pumps themselves and all the electronics to it.
Controls?
Controls, yes. And then the gatehouses are the same thing, controls. And at the wastewater plant, there's actually, more beefy. The boiler room has, boilers.
Do they also
And
have SCADA controls?
Yeah, and that instrumentation, obviously, when you have leaks in your roof, it's not a good situation. And I have personally witnessed the leaks in the boiler room at the wastewater plant that was talking about.
All right. Any other board questions? No. Got a question from the audience?
Yeah, Glenn Hunsaker, Allentown. The life of the shingles is going to be what on this? And was there a consideration for a metal coated roof in place of shingles?
I would say we would get a 30-year warranty.
30 year? They come up with 45, something, but
So
you decided on 30 years?
that's the,
I I know.
manufacturing standards,
Well,
so.
I know the last, if they go to 50 or 40, I know it's just an insurance deal, but I mean,
Right.
normally they do make a little thicker shingle between 30 and 40. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out your engineering people, how they decided this. And if they would have went to a metal roof, what, did you ever consider that?
Well, to be honest, I'm relying on our engineering. Dewey is the expert to decide the roof system. So I'm leaning on their expertise.
Well, we always question expertise. All experts sometimes don't be, you know, it's a money issue. Okay, I just maybe want to ask them that sometime.
All right,
Bill, I
is there
can-
another question?
Sure, go ahead, John.
We actually looked into some metal roofs on the first round that Phil had talked about, and they're usually at least twice as expensive, if not more. So it really wasn't included. Plus, all the flat membrane roofs can't take anything but a membrane, so that option wasn't there either, so.
So you did get a cost on the metal roofs,
On a couple,
on a couple?
but we just didn't proceed because we knew it was going to be several times more expensive.
And the extra life would have been, you think, on a metal roof compared to shingles? Because now
It definitely would
we're
have been
comparing a
longer.
30-year shingle roof, which,
It definitely would have been longer, but at this point in time, we just didn't feel it was appropriate for what we were doing.
okay.
All right, there was another question in the back. State your name, please.
John Donchis, Emmaus. Just overheard that some of these roofs are like from the 50s.
Some of our vintage roofs.
Some of them from the 30s.
Okay, but I mean, those shingles have been on since then? Nothing was,
A lot of them are slate.
okay, okay. Because I was going to say that that's a maintenance thing and that should be on a schedule, but hopefully that the maintenance gets adhered to at certain standards, because leaks are never good.
No.
And they don't start all of a sudden, you know, kind of a thing. And then the other was the built-up roof versus a rubber membrane, and it's because of weight restrictions or something,
And
possibly?
foot traffic and a couple other things about what you would want to have up there.
I think the rubber would be better versus built-up membrane.
Sometimes.
Yeah, most of the time I'd say, but,
Okay.
okay, that was it. Wanted
All right,
to
thank you.
find out.
Any other questions? Had the motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, ayes have it. All right, thank you. Moving on to the next, the wastewater item, which are the green papers, the final dial wastewater treatment plant primary number 2 digester cleaning.
And this is me again. If you recall, we just replaced the covers of 2 digesters at the wastewater plant. That was a Schedule 7 lease-driven project. And as part of that project, we had to clean both digesters. Historically, that's been done with our own personnel, but due to manpower issues, et cetera, the 2 that we just cleaned were done by a contractor, and that was the primary number 2 digester and the secondary digester. So for this project, we're talking about cleaning the 3rd digester down there. It's actually the primary number 1. The operations people like to clean these every 5 years. So this is the time to clean this digester. And what that entails is our people drain the digester down as far as we can. And then the contractor would get in there and hose all the sludge away from the walls, and then thicken the sludge out, and then our people are going to take our trucks and then dispose of the material properly. So that's the intent of the work. The contractor will clean it.
Phil, just to make sure it's clear, this is the primary number 2.
The primary number 1. So,
It says number 2 on our sheet here.
It
so.
is too
oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry about that.
We did one.
Yes, we replaced, yes, correct, thank you. We replaced number 1 in the secondary last year. So this is the number, the second primary that we're
Good question.
question.
How many are there, digesters? Are there only 3?
Yes.
Okay.
2 primaries, 1 secondary.
Okay, so, and that, this is the city of Allentown would cover all of the digesters in their system, these 3?
Yes, at the wastewater plant?
Yeah.
Yeah, those 3 can handle. They're not even close to being that.
So this would
Yes.
make, this would complete the cycle essentially
Yes.
until the next maintenance
Yes.
scheduling.
In like 2022.
What's the internal manpower, issue versus going out to contractor? I just want to make sure.
Johnny, you want to handle that?
We have a lot less staff than we had years ago. We're also not 25 or 30 years old anymore. So even the union was not for it, so we were more than happy to, and it was pretty much an even swap as far as cash goes. It wasn't a lot more expensive to do it outside.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point John brought up. We did have to get the union's blessing for all 3. So they gave us a blessing for the past 2, and then we approached them again and said, can we do this? And they said yes. And they just want to be made aware of it, in 4 or 5 years when it comes up for the next cleaning. They're going to ask.
That we would then go back and consider the internal manpower.
Correct.
If we
Depending
have
on-
the resources and so forth. Okay.
It is a miserable job. You have to really go and watch it.
Thank you.
So just getting into more details, the project was advertised in late February. We had a pre-bid, about 5 people showed up, and we had 4 bids. And the low bidder was a firm called Denali Water Solutions. They're a national firm, so this is part of what they do on a day-to-day basis. Their headquarters are in Arkansas, but they have a presence up here in the Northeast. And our engineer has used them, or has had experience with them in the past on other jobs, so there were no issues with Denali.
Who did the other 2?
The other 2 were actually the high bidder. I think they go by Frank Environmental.
Oh, okay.
So his numbers were about the same as what he did last time. So this Denali was significantly lower. So based on all that, I am requesting a capital plan authorization in the amount of $122,000, $89. This also includes a professional service authorization to GHD in the amount of $2,819. And again, this is for Denali Water Solutions in the amount of $104,270. And based on the operation schedule, this needs to be completed in the middle of June, by the middle of June.
It says the bid was 105,270.
That was my mistake.
Is it
It's
104?
104, yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that, that was my typo.
Who is GHD?
GHD, they did the cover replacement for us, the engineering firm.
For the engineering?
Yeah, the people we deal with out at Doylestown,
Okay.
but they have one of their headquarters is in Harrisburg.
So they wrote the spec and they'll inspect it?
Yeah, basically they just use the spec from the last 2 cleanings.
Thank you.
And again, their time on this is going to be minimal in the field. It's just going to be paperwork and closing out any questions you may have with the contractor.
Okay. Any other board questions? I saw a question from the audience in the back. Please state your
Hi,
name.
I'm Lynn Donches from Emmaus. I was just curious, there's a contingency of 10,000 I noticed in this one and the prior. What happens to that contingency if it's not used? What fund does it go into?
If it's not used, we just don't use it. So that covers anything that may happen during construction, but typically it's just there as a buffer.
So this comes from like a capital bucket and it
Yeah,
doesn't
correct.
get
And it
used?
doesn't get used.
Thanks.
The same thing with the engineering costs. If they don't use their cost, they just don't get paid. Their total cost.
My question was the engineering consultant, why do we need it on this particular item? What do they really do, other than say we got appointed, or? are they doing more than that?
The spec book preparation was a large chunk of it. They handle all basically the behind the scenes paperwork.
Can't we do this in-house?
We can if there was,
I mean, is this the first time we ever did this? LCA? The cleaning of these digesters?
well, besides the prior 2,
Whatever.
This will be the third clean, yes.
So we should have a boilerplate specification, what we have to do, so in-house, I would think.
Moving
maybe
forward,
we could save $2,800.
moving forward, yes. It's,
Rather than having to have a.
I'd like to comment on that.
Sure.
I've been in the construction business my whole life, and when you initiate a project, you need an engineer to write the spec, to control the bid process, to evaluate the bids once they come in, and to question the successful contractors to what they've included and what they've not included. This is very typical whenever you subcontract work. And to do it in-house, we rather defer to a professional firm that does this for a living.
I know
Makes perfect sense.
I know the standard is right now, nobody wants to do anything. They always want to farm everything out for consultants or somebody else. So when we're trying to save money here and there, maybe this is an area where you have to do it.
Possibly could do, but this is standard practice.
So, I mean, this is not brain surgery here.
yeah, a lot of it was the fact that we wanted to clean this in May, and you know how time goes by so fast.
Will there be, just a follow-up to that, will there be some presence of the contractor on site during or after to make sure it was done according to spec?
You just consulted?
The consultant, yeah.
Yes, yeah, he'll make us. We'll have a pre-construction meeting, and then he'll pop in sometime during the meeting, and then he'll get the job.
Verify it, yeah. Okay. There was another question in the audience.
Yeah, I was wondering, the type of,
Your name, please?
Tom Hahn, Allentown Division, I was wondering, what type of containers, that we use, are they all metal, or are some concrete, and when they clean them, what do they put on the walls of the container to not attract the buildup as fast? In other words, what are they using as a foul paint or a conditioner on the surface to prevent the rapid buildup? Or do they just clean the walls?
I can address this. These tanks have floating covers. The covers float on the surface of the water. As long as you don't have an airspace in there, you have no chance of hydrogen sulfide converting into hydrochloric acid, which in turn erodes the concrete. These covers float on the surface, so you do not have an airspace. So typically, the surface is always submerged, okay? So you don't have that problem. The surface is always submerged, so the concrete is fine. It's where you have an airspace and you have hydrogen sulfide gas emitting from the wastewater that it converts into hydrochloric acid. That's what eats your concrete. So we do not have a provision for coating these tanks as part of this project.
The reason why I ask on floating tanks, as the lid drops down, then air can get at the surface of what is floating.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how that was controlled, because...
Right, we do not see a problem with that right now. The tanks are in really fine shape. We don't have, and I understand what you're saying at the surface where you would have some gas. Doesn't seem to be a problem at Allentown.
Okay. All right, then I need a motion then. Motion made and seconded for capital project authorization, construction phase 122,089, including a general contract award to Denali for 104,270 and professional services authorization to GHD for 2819. I don't know how they come up with 2819, but okay. Motion made and seconded. Are there any other questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, ayes have it. We're going to go back on the agenda to the Finance and Administration. We're going to have an overview of the agreement with the Allentown Water Sewer System lease. Presentation by Lisa.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to start with just a comment that the reason we're doing this presentation is for a couple reasons. We do have 5 out of 9 board members are new since 2013, so we wanted to spend some time reviewing the terms of the lease agreement so that we're all sort of on the same page about what it says and what, how it's working. We also authorized in October a financial evaluation, a financial modeling project, and the results of that will be available at our next meeting on the 23rd. And so kind of as a two-step process, get us grounded again about what the lease says, and then next time when we look at the financial modeling for expected performance from 2018 forward, hopefully that this builds upon what we're talking about today. So I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly because there's a lot of background information and get us grounded here. So going back to 2013, we had an opportunity that was presented to us and the community in terms of the lease of the water and sewer systems from Allentown. And this map shows our water service areas and what we were looking at that time, where LCA service areas are noted in blue and the Allentown system noted in green. And also very important to us is the fact that the systems are interconnected. So there's a lot of synergy there between our systems already. Same thing on the wastewater side. As we've been talking about the administrative order and talking about the regional system that LCA owns and operates and how that connects Allentown to all the communities in Lehigh County. There's some figures. I don't want to belabor the point, but in 2013, LCA was a small organization, 39 employees from an employee standpoint, but we did have an annual operating budget of about $22 million and outstanding debt of almost $40 million. And I do note that's the principal only, so obviously interest would be on top of that. But our outstanding principal amount of debt was there. The city system had 103 employees in their water and sewer systems and a larger operating budget but a smaller debt load for the water systems. And then in the summer of 2012, we had some things happen. So just to kind of set the stage, 20 plus years of discussions between Allentown and LCA about some kind of consolidation or regionalization. How would that work and what would that look like? And that was kind of the background. Moving forward, though, we're seeing a resurgence at that time of public-private partnerships, the P3 deals that were going on, and also as a backdrop, Allentown with a $160 million unfunded pension liability and not having any particular funding source for that. That's sort of setting the stage. And then on July 19th of 2012, I call it a bombshell because it was a total surprise to us when we received this document from the city of Allentown. They issued a request for qualifications for bidders for a 50-year lease of their water and sewer systems. Some highlights of that document. Free cash flow of approximately $10 million per year. And I have a couple illustrations from the RFQ that show what I mean by that. Moderate rates for city ratepayers, high quality, in fact, award-winning water quality, and diverse water supply with excess capacity available. The city also planned to enter into a negotiation that would be flexible and address concerns along the way prior to asking for bids. And then a clear statement that the city is looking for an upfront cash payment as part of this process. That's what the whole purpose of the deal was. I'm going to show a lot of excerpts of documents in this presentation. We're going to post it on our website and so that you can read more of it later. So I just want to preface that I don't expect us all to read all the words on the page today. But this is from section 1, the very first statement in the RFQ from the city that states the main purpose of the concession is to generate upfront proceeds. So that's kind of the backdrop. And then included in some of the documentation in their RFQ was historical performance of the water system, showing revenues and expenses and free cash flow. And then same thing on the sewer side. As a nonprofit public organization, we asked ourselves, and some of us are still in the room, and most of us weren't in the room at the time, we asked ourselves, why should we do this? Why should we compete? And from LCA's perspective, there certainly was some synergy that we thought could be achieved. We are adjacent systems, we have interconnections and contractual relationships already with the city. So that makes sense for us to look at it. We have common issues and challenges related to water resources, the administrative order, planning for the future. And we have this long history and relationship with the city. We also thought there'd be some opportunities for economies of scale, where we could eliminate some duplication of effort and build on our regional utility perspective. We also went into the discussions making some very clear statements that if we were going to bid, we wanted it to be a bid that would stand on its own, that the transaction would not be subsidized by the suburban systems or the existing LCA business financially or operationally. So the long story short, there's a lot of dates on here, but I wanted to illustrate that over the course of a little over a year, we went from the city announcing their plans to lease the water and sewer systems, a lot of actions taken, LCA submitting qualifications along with 6 other private entities, and then getting to the point where we're issuing a bid or being invited to bid by the city. I have a couple items highlighted here that I'm going to talk about more. First of all, Lehigh County rejecting our request to extend our charter to 50 years. That was an important component. Submitting our best and final offer on the lease of $220 million, and then of course issuing the bonds to finance the deal. Those are some key things I'm going to talk about more. So first, to talk about the authority structure and the 50-year charter. Municipal authority, you all know, but for the benefit of the public as well, municipal authority is formed under the Pennsylvania Municipality Authorities Act, and the board of directors are appointed by our parent organization, which is the County of Lehigh. We may have a lifespan of no more than 50 years, and we're a non-taxing agency and can take advantage of tax-exempt financing. So in the spring of 2013, we had a charter that was set to expire in 2049. And for us to enter into a 50-year lease period, we needed our charter to be extended to 2062, and that was denied by the county. The impact to that is pretty significant, I'd say. The lease becomes, at that point, a 35-year agreement instead of a 50-year agreement, and that's unless our life is extended, in which case we would have the benefit of the full 50 years. Very specifically, our bond issue would be limited to the 35 years, so we could only fund it through the end of our charter. And the last bullet, I think, is important just to acknowledge that there's political fallout, board turnover, distrust in the relationship between LCA and the county that has been a challenge and something that we are trying to work on at this point in time. I want to acknowledge that we're in front of the county now asking for our 50-year charter extension again. And those of you on our board have received a lot of information from me that has been prepared to answer your questions and to help the county commissioners understand. I know that there's been a lot of various meetings and conversation. Brian, Linda, and I met with Amanda Holt last week, and I believe Dina's meeting with Amanda today. So there's a lot, and there's probably other conversations that have been happening along the way as well. So, we're trying to extend our information and share openly what we're about and, and work on that relationship with the county. But it'll be a challenge to work through that, acknowledge that. So I wanted to go through some of the provisions of the lease. There's an awful lot, and the document is very thick. There's a lot of words on the page in this document. It is posted on our website, but I want to give you some of the highlights. First of all, on the revenue side, Schedule 3 in the lease agreement sets the starting point for where the rates are. And I apologize, sorry. Turn my ringer off. Schedule 3 this is the sewer rate schedule that's shown in the lease. So we have those rates as the starting point, and the water rates as well. This is part of the lease as where the rates are or were, I should say, in 2013. So beginning in 2016, the lease provision says that the rates in Schedule 3 may increase by CPI plus 2.5% through 2032, and then CPI plus 2% thereafter. So that provides the revenue increase over time for the base revenue. And then there's a capital cost recovery charge for major capital improvements. And that's intended to recover the cost of large projects over a period of 30 years using a rate of return. Here's one of my many quotes from the lease agreement. This will be posted on our website so you can see the actual language here. But I just highlighted the definition of major capital improvements and highlighting this section that says it's any other project or any other capital improvement that has an estimated cost of $1 million or more adjusted for inflation, and that a written opinion of an engineering firm says that it's an expansion, renewal, replacement, or betterment of the system. So that's what a major capital improvement is. And so in this 30-year recovery period, we have the ability to recover the costs through this capital cost recovery charge. That is subject to city approval. The city may, however, withhold approval if the charge for a project is more than 200% greater than the charge of any prior year. That's a provision within the lease agreement. Another provision is that LCA is not required to complete a major capital improvement until we have that approval for the capital cost recovery charge. So there's some checks and balances within the language. Here's another piece of the language here that basically says the concessionaire can determine that the following events have occurred before we start construction of the improvement. And one of those events is having city approval of the charge. And that is right behind Brian's head. Because the last item, change of law and DRBC fees, these are some terms that are in the lease agreement that allow us to recover costs through the rates as an additional rate for a major change in regulation that requires a capital improvement to address that change of law. And that would be regardless of the $1 million threshold for a major capital improvement. These were a change of law, not a change of regulation.
What would an example of the DRBC fees be?
We pay DRBC fees every year for permitted withdrawals and
Of the water limit,
yeah,
the
Yeah.
permittable water limit.
yeah. And so because the DRBC is that's in there, I'm assuming because the DRBC's fees can fluctuate depending on authorization from the states and how they receive their funding. So those are some protections that are included in the lease so that LCA or the concessionaire has the ability to respond to changes in regulation by implementing projects that are required. Expenses. One of the key lease provisions that relate to expenses are the operating standards, and I'm saying they are raising the bar I promise I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points, but I have 4 pages of excerpts from the table of contents of the operating standards that give you an idea of all the different things that the city has laid out for us as standards that we must meet related to hydrants, leak detection, inspection. There's requirements in here for meeting certain effluent performance standards that are greater than regulatory requirements. So lots of things that are included in this operating standard that we need to meet. And so, and those represent some pretty significant improvements in preventive maintenance for the system, and include, as I mentioned, treatment standards that exceed regulatory requirements. There's customer service standards, and there are operational liquidated damages if we don't do them. I'm happy to report that we do meet these standards and have exceeded them throughout the first 4+ years of the lease. Capital improvements are another major expense item that is covered in the lease agreement. So there's 3 categories of capital improvements that I wanted to highlight. Uncompleted work are specific projects that the city had started or had wanted to start, or they were committed to doing. And so LCA, as the concessionaire, completes those projects, but the city actually reimburses and pays for them directly with no breakdown. The required projects are a list of specific projects in Schedule 7. Sometimes you hear us talking about Schedule 7 projects. These are these required projects that the city has laid out as projects we must do. We complete them, and then they are approved for recovery through that capital cost recovery charge. And then another one that's really specifically laid out in the lease agreement are water main replacement projects where we're required to do 2 miles per year.
Lisa, can I just ask a quick cash flow question on the uncompleted work? Are we floating the cash flow and then sending them a bill for how much they owe us?
Yeah,
have we been paid timely?
Yeah, we have a 30-day sort of turnaround with them on that.
And we don't have any outstanding issues with being paid for that?
Not spent, no.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So one of the challenges that I think we're seeing the impact of relates to the capital projects and the cost of the capital projects. This is just an excerpt related to the required capital improvements, the Schedule 7 improvements, where the city listed these projects, and in the lease it gives an estimate of what those projects would cost, and then we have LCA's actual costs in there, and those are certainly significantly more than originally anticipated.
Question.
Yes.
The estimated costs
Yeah.
were put together by whom? The city of Allentown.
Yes, they're in the lease agreement as a schedule to the lease.
And so LCA received the documentation, looked at those, and did what?
We completed the projects for.
I mean, when you
Yeah.
first looked at the,
Yeah.
you personally, this is the capital.
Yeah.
Who are you? You looked at these and said what? What did you say?
They're,
Well, they're accurate, they've been.
I can't answer that. I personally, I don't know that anyone in the room, I apologize, I don't know that anyone in the room was here to actually evaluate and to answer how they were evaluated. I do know that there's some knowledge that these costs were based on older studies. And so, there was some level of inflation of those costs when we put them in our, in the bid model.
You understand
But I
the
don't
question I'm
know.
going
Yeah,
with.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know generally what it costs to replace a water main. And
There's going to be a lot
so,
of detail in this, depending on the project. This is
Well,
not easy stuff.
there's a big difference between replacing a water main and a suburban system.
That's my point. This is $10 million worth of projects that unless you do a whole lot of due diligence on, it's
Right.
really hard to determine how accurate.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, a couple of other important provisions of the lease. One is about the municipal service agreements, and those municipal service agreements relate to both water and wastewater. The lease says that they will remain in force and shall not be amended by the city without our consent as it relates to revenue impacts. That's important to us in a couple different ways, because not only do we want the agreements to be enforced as they are today, but if things change, we need to have a conversation about what the impacts are to revenue. And so there's some specific language about that. This has not been an issue. I really just wanted to highlight it as a term of the lease that was negotiated. Another big one relates to the administrative order, and the administrative order for US EPA's order against the sanitary sewer overflows. It's an excluded liability in the lease agreement, and that means the city retains responsibility to address the administrative order and to fund the projects. These extra bullet points are important, though. The city decides what projects are to be done, and they direct LCA to complete them, and then the city pays for them based on their funding mechanism. That's the first bullet. The second bullet is that the city is issuing bonds to do the projects, and so LCA collects payment from the municipalities and the city customers as a pass-through to pay the city back for their bond payment on a debt service schedule.
Would you define municipalities there, please?
Sure. They are, you want me to tell you which ones they are? South Whitehall, Salisbury, Emmaus, Hanover Township, Copley Whitehall Sewer Authority, and LCA Suburban. Oh, and Lower Macungie Township has a small piece of that.
Thank you.
So Lisa, I just want to understand, we have all of our capital plans, and that includes a lot of the capital expenditures for the 50-year lease system, which will be encompassed in the city division, and whether we're using operating cash or there's borrowing to make those improvements, that's us doing that. But that the AO expenses, which there may be some overlap in those capital improvement projects now, would be outside of our city division financials. And I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. It's the way it looks in our financials, and Ed, you can chime in, please, but we show it in our capital plan.
All of these
separately,
things.
yes.
Oh, okay.
But they're in the capital plan as administrative order projects that we will do, and that's a cash out. And then there's reimbursement, which is a cash in from the city. The city does have other expenses that they pay directly, which is not reflected at all in our, their staff time and if they have consultants that they have working on.
But all of the 50-year lease, capital improvements, and routine repairs and maintenance that would be encompassed in the city division outside of the AO line would be shown in our financial statements and funded as part of the lease.
Yeah.
So, and the AO would be that only separate line that applies to this item directly.
Correct.
And would be reimbursed. So on a financial statement basis, we would see it until they pay us.
Yeah.
And there should be no financial impact other
Well,
than the
there would
time
be
period of money.
The net cash flow would be zero.
Right, other than.
Other than the timing difference between when we actually fronted some money up
Right.
front and we got it back from them. Very similar to the required.
And the asset would be held on their books? Or the
That
AO?
asset would be held on their books.
Right, but the
It's
remaining
their
50-year
requirement.
lease improvements and also asset improvements would be on the city division.
I want to clarify, because from an asset perspective, given this is a concession lease agreement.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
There are no assets for LCA on this, okay? So.
At the end of the 50 years, it's
even
their
now-
asset,
even-
yeah.
Even as time goes on now.
Right,
Essentially.
but we're accumulating the value in the city division.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the
It's
complications.
not a tangible asset.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's an intangible asset, it's not a tangible asset. That's
Yeah.
why I wanted to bring that up, because when we talk about the assets always stay on the city books.
So there's no depreciation or anything being calculated
Not
on the
on-
intangible
not
asset?
on
Right,
intangible
I just
asset.
want to make sure I understand.
Not on the tangible asset, it's only on that portion of the value that gets amortized over the lease.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed.
Sorry, I just.
No, that's good.
I thought
Better
it
than I
was
can
so
say
that
it.
we understand where actually the physical assets always reside on the city books.
Right,
I mean,
Can I
Okay.
ask a question?
yes?
The assets on the vehicles that were originally turned over in this agreement, are they a moot point that they're going to evaporate, those assets?
No, the vehicles were the only asset that came over to us, they passed title to us at closing. So essentially, we maintain the fleet.
You're going to maintain, and that's a depreciation on
That's
LCA
depreciation
side.
on our books, yes. The system itself, no. That portion, the vehicles and the fleet, we want to call it the fleet, yes, we maintain that, we took title to that, that was all passed at closing. So yes, there's depreciation on that.
But at the end of the 50 years, or wherever this agreement runs out, what's your estimate of the asset value in those vehicles? Is zero?
It would be zero theoretically unless we happen to have a vehicle that was still around for
Okay.
1 or 2, but
Very good.
I mean, you could say conceptually zero because we would not depreciate any longer than the length of the arrangement, so.
Okay, let's go, continue.
Okay. That's the language relating to how the AO is financed, which you can look at later on our website. Another couple of important other provisions are some required payments. The annual city payment is $500,000 adjusted for inflation. And then there's another piece that we've been talking and looking at a lot lately, which is the CapEx fund. The CapEx fund is a fund that LCA must establish beginning in the year 2033, where we put in $1 million per year, $2 million beginning in 2043, and then $3 million in 2053. And those are all adjusted for inflation. The point of the CapEx fund is to ensure that there are monies available for capital improvements where the capital cost recovery charge extends beyond the end of the lease, which means we can't recover anything beyond the end of the lease. So this fund is established to help us with those costs and to ensure that we can do capital improvements. And there's some language there for you too.
Question.
Interested. Yes, sir.
I know I've asked this before, but on the 500,000 cash flow from your account to the city's account, how did that come about that the ratepayers pay the 500,000 to the city and it doesn't come from the LCA? In other words, how did that agreement take place, and why can't that money be turned over on the Allentown Division for the executive orders, or that the citizens have the bond and that money can't apply to that? Can someone explain how that provision got in there that no one in the Allentown Division knew about it till we started to come out to the meetings here and find out how it got in? In other words, why isn't that used against the cost?
Yeah, I think you're asking maybe the wrong entity that question. I mean, this is a term of the lease agreement, so we're paying that according to what we're required to do. How the city uses that funding is up to the city. So I can't answer that except to say that when the city asked for bids, they asked for an upfront payment plus an annual payment, and there were some parameters around that, and so that's what we
The
had.
question came up, it's the ratepayers get charged for that payment to the city.
Paying themselves.
That we're paying ourselves.
Well, we're not, we're paying the city.
Well, we're paying the city, yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Your point is made.
Yeah.
I think, I want to keep the presentation going, and we
No, I
can come back
understand.
and get your question.
is there a way of getting that information?
It was in terms of the lease. And we didn't establish that, it was part of the lease. So what Allentown does with that money is up to Allentown. But we're going to continue with the presentation here so we can get it all in.
Yeah. Okay, so in summary, be clear, this is our 2013 view of the lease. It's a complex agreement for sure. We still think it's a complex agreement, so that hasn't changed. But the agreement provides a steady, predictable base of revenue based on the CPI plus 2.5% or plus 2%. So for the base revenue, there's some predictability to revenues. We felt that there were some big unknowns, and we're still struggling with some of the big unknowns. Future capital improvements, and to acknowledge, yes, we know that there are improvements. We know that those are needed, but what's the scope of them? What are they going to cost? When are they going to be needed? And looking out over 50 years, that's a lot to try to put together. Future regulatory changes, that is certainly tempered to a large degree by some terms of the lease agreement that allow us to recover those costs, but that's an unknown. Inflation over time is a big unknown. You make a lot of assumptions about what you think is going to happen, but it never actually happens that exact way. And the rate impacts of all of these things is really the big unknown. So all of these things have the potential to impact rates, and we don't know what that is going to look like. We can make some educated guesses. We do think that there's an opportunity, or thought that there was an opportunity in the 2013 view, that by having a 35-year debt structure over compared to a 50-year agreement would mean that the last 15 years of the lease could be debt-free, and that provides some pretty significant cash accumulation, and that's an opportunity to bring value back to Allentown in some way. So that's really what we were looking at, or one of the things that we were looking at. Transition period from May 1st to August 7th was 97 days of really a very busy time. We'll just say that. We had an awful lot to do. Recruit and hire employees, finance the deal. Lots of things happened in 90 days. And so just the before and after, what a difference a day can make on August 7th versus August 8th of 2013. And I think these are really expected based on the first slide I showed you. But going up to 151 employees overnight was a huge deal. Going from an annual operating budget, doubling our annual operating budget, huge deal. The biggest deal is the debt profile, going from $40 million of debt to almost $350 million of debt overnight. It's a big issue. That's principal only, and we'll talk about interest in a second. The bond issue, I just wanted to highlight how a $220 million bid turned into a $308 million bond issue. And so the upfront lease payment actually was reduced because of an interest rate fluctuation from 220 down to 211. And so a couple other highlights. A bunch of reserve funds were established. And in particular, the capital improvement fund of $31.9 million was established from bond proceeds. And so that was important to capture so we could do projects right away. And so we have a total of almost $308 million. And we do want to acknowledge the debt burden over 35 years is pretty tremendous, with a commitment of $771 million when you include interest over 35 years. It's pretty staggering. This will be with this presentation on the website too. This is the full debt schedule, so you can see how that's structured. Draw your attention to where we are today, which is the 2018 line. Here you can see we're paying interest only on this one. We're going to start next year to start paying on the 2013 B bonds, and the 2013 C bonds, we've been paying interest, and this year is when the principal is due for that to term out. And we'll talk about the impact of that in a sec.
Question for you.
That's okay.
You talk about how the 211 grew to 307 million. all those line items in there came from where? Obviously, a bunch of folks sat down and said, we need to do these things. These were the consultants we had hired, I assume, and the authority sat down and cobbled together what the bond
issue would look like. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excuse me, can you go back one slide to the bonds? I'm confused.
This one?
2013C
Yeah,
is showing 18.7 million plus the interest in 2018,
yeah.
and then nothing.
And then what?
Then nothing.
Yeah, that's the end of that bond issue. It would be.
Oh, that's a running total.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you very much.
it'd be
Okay,
full.
thank you. Just confused.
Okay, so some financial benchmarks that are important for the lease. And some of these, I use the word dashboard because Ed is reporting on some of them every month to the board. And I split them up just for discussion purposes for trust indenture versus other ones that are important to us. So the trust, the M&T bank, the trustee, bondholders are really looking at reserve balances being met. They're looking at total fund balance, and they're looking at debt service coverage ratio. Those three things are really what they're interested in. For us, for Lehigh County authorities, we want to look at some other things. Certainly, total debt service each year is important, including any new borrowing. Net cash, these are all tied together. Of course, net cash after debt service leads us to understand what we need to borrow to do CapEx, and really trying to set this benchmark for goals for internal funding that would be available for capital improvements. Because that's really where we need to be heading. And we've talked about that at several board meetings. So I have one handout. I'm going to keep one for myself. And just have them go around. The handout that's going around is our cash flow statement using the format that is in our bond documents, showing 2013 and 2016 actuals, 2017 preliminary actuals, unaudited, and then what our 2018 budget looks like. I chopped off the 2018 budget for this so that the numbers would show. But what we're looking at as far as performance is some positive and some negative points here. The positives, we're making our debt service coverage ratio that is required for the bond document. We are keeping cash balances and reserve balances where they need to be. We're keeping our cumulative operating cash balance at a positive, which is good. However, you can see we've had some years where we did not, in that individual year, make a positive cash flow. And 2017 was pretty close, we'll say. And then the yellow line that I wanted to highlight is this is what's in the bond document of where we thought we would be at this point for the operating cash balance. So we had a stronger start than anticipated in 2013 and really 2014, and then things changed, and that really relates to some changes in the way revenue was coming in and understanding how that works, especially as it relates to municipal service agreements, and then rebounding a little bit over the next 2 years, but certainly not hitting the target that was in the bond model. So today's challenges, just to sort of set the stage where we are today, our performance shows that we have met the financial benchmarks for the bond issue. But in 2018, we will have fully utilized that first almost $32 million we borrowed for CapEx, correct?
It will be done.
It'll be gone. In 2018, the bond payment of $31.8 million includes $19 million of principal that will be required to be refinanced. I did underline this, that it is noted in the bond documents that this would happen. We issued the bonds knowing that we would have to refinance that this year. So that's happening on schedule. Not happy about having to do it, but certainly it's happening on schedule. The cash that we've accumulated from 2013 to 2017 is not adequate to fund future capital improvements. So we'll need to do some additional borrowing if we're going to maintain the CapEx plan levels that we have anticipated. And that is also something that was included in our bond documents as a prediction. So we knew we'd have to fund future capital improvements with borrowing.
Can I just interject there? That is assuming in the financial analysis that you capped at the rate increase structure, and we can't go above that?
So in some ways, I'm saying we're hitting the targets because the schedule is right on schedule. We're needing to borrow for CapEx. Right on schedule. We're needing to refinance the bonds. But that second sub-bullet, the actual performance being lower than anticipated, is a challenge, and that's really due to lower revenues. That's the primary driver for the financial performance we're seeing. New borrowing will create additional pressure on those benchmarks, so our ability to maintain the debt service coverage ratio that we need to will be impacted by new borrowing. And ultimately, we need to begin generating additional revenue so we can hit those escalating bond payments and do the CapEx that needs to be done. Those capital improvements are important for the system to be maintained.
But within the rate structure, we have no ability to do that, is that what you're saying? If
have-
I'm reading you right, under the city division, we have no ability to do that other than what's in the agreement, so it has to come from other sources, right?
Given the current rate structure, you're absolutely correct. That is the limitation.
Particularly given we're saying we're going to assess this individually on its own merit.
Right.
We have a rate cap of 2.5 based on the language. You've already baked that into your financial analysis to figure out what the rate structure can be. And doing all that net of reduction of expenses and all the other improvements that we're going to talk about on the 23rd, we still see having to borrow to foot the loss.
I think that, let's say a qualified yes, you're correct. I think we should, we're going to hear more on the 23rd about what that really means. The next steps that we're suggesting is on the 23rd, we'll have the financial modeling work done so that we can present what the full lease financial profile looks like from now through 2062 and where the biggest gaps are. We do have some ideas about revenue enhancements and some other enhancements we can do either operationally or with revenues. We'll roll those
And
out.
while that's quantification, you'll go through that as well.
Yeah.
And that's the key. You can
Yeah.
utilize that going forward to continue to see how we are against what we said.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we really want to set now that we are in the lease, back in the spring of 2013, when we're putting a bid model together, it's based on a lot of, we're not operating the system, so we don't know exactly how things are going to flow. Now we know how things work, and so our bond or our financial model should be far more reliable, far more accurate, and we want to benchmark actual performance against that, and we do that moving forward. We do need to set the schedule for refinancing the 2013 C bonds. There's some deadline pressure to work through that. And on the 23rd, we're also going to talk a little bit about how CH2M, who did the work for us, looked at capital improvements and some new models that they have for phasing and prioritization and some other things that I think will help us with discussions. So that's where we're headed at the next board meeting. I'm hoping that last hour of reviewing the lease details helps us to set the stage for this discussion in 2 weeks.
Okay, board comments, questions, we can get to the public after.
I just have really a general comment. It's just broken record, like the board has heard me say it over and over again. I am very much looking forward to actually not even we've seen the draft, and I'm just looking forward to the presentation of the actual, recommendations, because there should be no idea that is not, is not considered given the situation. We need to look at all ideas, if we think we're crazy or not crazy.
Hang on. Can you press the silence button, please? You got it?
But it's going to be really important to utilize that financial model because, it's so challenging, and I appreciate the education you have being one of those people who wasn't here, and having my own thoughts about this,
The Russians attacked us.
Just pull the plug.
Pull the balloon.
Please stand by.
Um,
Thank you.
Super concerned about the revenue pressure, particularly given there's no ability, above the rate caps to manage that as I would normally have control in the business to do that. And certainly the capital improvements that have to happen in the system as a result of data and the other stuff, super challenging. So the financial model that Ed's going to be able to hopefully have and continue to use is going to be very critical in making some of the really important decisions we have to move towards this sustainability, because I don't suspect that any of these options are going to be easy or painless. So seeing them quantified and being able to roll the tape in that model and seeing how we're doing against what we thought is critical, because it's really hard to see all this complicated stuff and know what it means in terms of the due diligence that was done and how it actually shook out without seeing something concrete like that where you can say, here's the assumptions and here's how we're doing going forward and be able to manage it, because there's a lot of really tough decisions.
Yeah. I agree. We're looking forward to sharing that with you when it's complete and kind of setting the stage for future solutions.
But just to clarify, this was just scratching the surface of the contents of the leasing, concession lease agreement. There's so much more of that. It's an extremely complicated document and a real challenge to stick with it and do our best. Okay.
Yeah,
Any other questions from the board?
I'd like to just, if I could add on to that, that I brought two very large documents with me, both of which are very important. Lease agreement, bond document. The bond document and the trust indenture includes a whole ton of other things that we have to do, not so much operationally, but how we have to report and the due diligence we need to do on a regular basis to have the trustee feel confident that we're doing a good job in meeting our targets. So there's a lot of requirements there too that we didn't go over today.
Any questions? Right from the audience?
Yes.
Yes.
Joe Hilliard, South Allentown. To sum up, looking at this from 10,000-foot view of reality, despite all the assurances by our ex-criminal mayor, LCA, all kinds of community leaders that this was going to be a great deal to save Allentown, all the parties involved, all the experts, basically took a $160 million problem and turned it into a $771 million problem for the residents of Allentown. This is why citizens fought this so hard. This was a fiscal, irresponsible act beyond belief. It's just incomprehensible what was done to the residents of Allentown. It's funny, we citizens with calculators, we calculated the merger together would lose $7 million a year. Your audits are showing 10. How did we know what all these experts did? We warned. The capital costs were grossly underestimated just by knowing people in the water and sewer department who knew reality and how long maintenance costs were deferred by our ex-criminal mayor. but you turn this into a $771 million bond. Now, I hope when you do your models, I would factor in what I call the Flint factor. Remember the big lead brouhaha? Why did Flint, Michigan switch to the lake water and stop buying, I think they were getting it from the Chicago water system, the cleaner water? Anybody know?
Price.
Right, well, why though? Rates went so high, people stopped paying. You better factor that in, because there's a certain point you're gonna start losing ratepayers. I mean, just, and because you are gonna jack up rates. There's no cap, you have the capital loophole, as I've been calling it for years. I was assured at the night of the city council meeting, I didn't understand. No, that's exactly the loophole that's gonna drive a truck through these rate increases. And when you start hitting $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 a year, you're gonna see a significant drop in revenues. So, you know, I said 5 years ago, the bomb will start hitting. Here we are. Thank you very much.
Just one response to that myself. Can't help myself, but had a choice between LCA getting this lease and somebody that's a for-profit. It'd be a lot different discussion if it was a for-profit that would come.
Well, the known for-profits, I know there was potentially a sham bidder. We were never able to find out who they were. I believe that was the second closest bid. I believe the others came in 40 million lower. There's a reason they did that.
Do you know that was the second bidder, was the sham bidder?
American Water was the second bidder. And they were within 5% of our bid.
Okay, but, well,
They were not a sham.
Yeah.
They're out there actively buying
well,
systems.
you would remain a financially viable organization if you didn't do it, so.
Now we'll still be paying an awful lot more.
A question, Lisa, can you amplify on your recent meeting you had with, on the AO problem with
Sure.
the DEP, or whoever it was you were, a week or
Yes.
two ago?
We met on March the 23rd with EPA and DEP and all of the 14 municipalities who were named in the administrative order. So the purpose of that meeting was to discuss the path forward, and considering that December 31st, 2017 was the deadline to submit our corrective action plans, we've been talking with EPA and DEP for quite some time about what those plans would look like, and they asked for the meeting so that we could discuss it before we finalized our plans for submission. In that meeting, we focused on, or EPA focused on, what they're really looking for, which is a plan, what they call a regional flow management plan, or a regional flow management program, whereby we're focusing on flow metering and flow modeling, so we know where the peak flows are coming from, and then projects that really focus on collection system improvements and rehabilitation going forward.
Now, is LCA gonna do that work, come up with a plan, or is that in conjunction with Allentown?
It will, for the city system,
Yeah,
the city will develop their plan to, well, it's going to be a joint plan. It's going to be one submission. All 14 of us, we believe, will be working together to do one submission. But the city is still under the AO and still obligated to do the work that's related to the city system.
was there any discussion on the amount of money estimated for this AO completion?
No, and that's partly because we've been focused on large capital improvements, and this is sort of a shift in focus, so I think the city is going to have to determine what improvements are going to be made and what that will cost, and you can turn your chair around and talk to the folks behind you if you want more detail, because I can't prepare that for you.
Well, originally, it came out in 13, it was like 25 to 50 million. I see an article in the paper, 300 million, but I don't know what that number is.
So the big numbers that you're seeing are a conglomeration of a lot of projects, but the projects that LCA has been talking about really relate more to the Western Lehigh system, or suburban systems, because we have large interceptor upgrades, pump station upgrades, and other work that is being done in Western Lehigh County, which has nothing to do with the city lease or the city ratepayers.
Was there any discussion on the stormwater problem with EPA? I know it might not be in that discussion or that meeting, it's a separate issue, but was there any Was that ever brought out at that meeting?
No, the stormwater is totally separate. They're not combined systems, so the city has their own program related to stormwater that's separate from LCA.
One more question. Were you, with the consultant that Allentown had for the stormwater, did they consult LCA, like Pittsburgh has a combination system where it all goes together? Was LCA ever approached for an input?
No, because our systems are not combined.
I
So,
understand
yep.
that. But- Okay.
Okay. We're-
Just had a question as far as like these cost sharings with all the municipalities. John Donches from Emmaus. I understand that Emmaus has a pretty good contract with Allentown. What effects or would there be any changes that EPA or any of these other organizations could override any of these contracts? It sounded like you can't change anything through Allentown anyway without getting like their permission. So what effects will this have on Emmaus?
I can't answer that. I mean, that's really a to be determined type of question, but the agreements that Allentown has with Emmaus are still in effect, and the LCA is the concessionaire. We're administering that. If something would come out of the EPA work that would impact how we're being billed for service, that would affect all the municipalities, not just Emmaus, but I couldn't tell you what that would be. There's no anticipation that that would actually happen.
Okay, that they would have any effect on any of these contracts that exist already. They would not go in there and modify them in any way to help this situation.
EPA would not.
Okay.
Now, if the municipalities decided there was some reason to do that, then that would be a discussion that would happen with the municipalities and the city and LCA, but that's not been contemplated.
I know that there was heavy pressure put on them to change. So I want to understand that that is not up to you or the other government entities trying to force a contract change.
Any contract change would be done with the city, with LCA participating.
Okay. At city as far as Allentown or Emmaus?
The city would negotiate with Emmaus, with LCA participating.
Okay.
If there was a contract change contemplated and desired.
Okay.
But the whole idea of the administrative order and the SSO elimination is that we're talking about a watershed, right? And
Yeah.
we're not, and each municipality contributes in some way to that impact, right? And so how do you determine fair, right? And what I would call like leave no trace. And that entails, flow monitoring and baseline assessments of what were you contributing and what are you eliminating from the system that you get credit for. So that's part of this conversation, is to try and make it fair. And there will be probably costs to all for their portion of their impact on the watershed, but it has to be systematic, based on science, based on the whole watershed with the proper points put in play to actually model and analyze that data. So that actually is part of what EPA is requesting be done, a systematic watershed approach to managing the watershed and the impacts, as well as the I&I reduction, if I understand correctly the most recent conversation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Brian and Lisa?
Yeah. I think that just when it comes down to who pays which part.
And that's why that
EPA
data
is-
analysis is very important, right? Because you
Absolutely.
you have to agree that data doesn't lie if you're going to agree on the protocol and you agree on the right point with data being managed, and the other end of the stream, other end of that flow is another municipality, and you do the math, everybody has to agree on their impacts. And then you have the opportunity to reduce that impact using I&I and other mechanisms.
There's another question?
I didn't get a chance to come and thank the board for intervening on a problem we had in our neighborhood where a company wanted to come in and clean out 500-gallon plastic containers and dump them into the sewer, cleaning them up. And I came out to the board to mention it, and within one day, the phone call to the city stopped that person from coming to the Allentown area from Quakertown, where they violated a lot of rules and regulations. So at that time, I asked a question about the control that LCA has over the zoning people who actually should have the new rules for water and sewerage that agree with you, and if anybody followed through on that, so that the neighborhood doesn't have to do the research and the rules for the zoning in the different areas wherever it is are updated to your standards, because the city standards aren't even applying anymore because of you LCA taking over the treatment. Could somebody look into that to make sure that they can allow companies to come in who would either put more abuse in or violate whatever your standards are now as far as the zoning areas in the different municipalities?
Yeah, I guess I'm not as sure about the zoning impact, and I can speak to the folks at the city to try to understand that more. But I will say that the industrial pretreatment ordinance that was in the city's ordinance was updated last year and designated LCA as the administrator of that program. And so we do have a pretreatment coordinator who manages all discharges into the sewer system, testing protocols and all of that. So, and that's actually a very collaborative sort of relationship that we have with the city. So how that overlays with zoning, I'm not sure, but we can understand.
I just wanted to thank you for taking care of that part.
Okay, thank you. All right. We're going to move off of the overview of the agreement. The next item is number 6, the monthly project update.
Yes. Thank you all for the attention, the questions. I do recognize that it's been a while since we looked at these. It was a lot of information to take in, so thank you for that. I want to highlight 2 things on the monthly project update report for the next meeting. And it's really timely, actually. Phil DePoe and myself have been working with some students. Thank you for being here. At the Muhlenberg College. Muhlenberg College has a business program and their business policy and strategy class for the seniors has a project that the students have to do. And a couple of the students selected LCA as an organization they wanted to do some work for. And their work is related to capital project prioritization and return on investment and that sort of thing, which is very timely for us. So they're going to be here at the next meeting to present their results. I appreciate your indulgence on that. And that ties right into the other item, which is that we do expect to have the folks from CH2M and Davenport Consulting as well as Raftellus here on the 23rd to present the results of the financial model work that they've been doing on the city division. And I'm happy to try to answer, or Chuck will answer, any other questions you have about anything on that.
Any other board questions on the monthly report? All right, seeing none, items 7 and 8 are not covered at this board meeting. Staff comments?
I have one comment, which is just a reminder that the county commissioners meeting on Wednesday this week is another reading of the ordinance requesting our charter extension. And I've been doing an awful lot of work with the commissioners, and I know several others in the room are as well. The meeting is at 7:30 as well as you are participating and seeing how that goes.
All right, any other staff comments? Solicitor comments?
The only comment I have is just that the Ethics Commission forms are released at the end of the month. I think most everybody, you might be one of the few, so thank you all for getting to me, I appreciate it.
Anybody else have anything outstanding?
I just have a clarifying question, Brad, based on Mr. Hilliard's comment about the rate could be increased, but it says in the lease that it can't be increased. Can it, is there or not, can it or can't?
What he's talking about
Yeah,
is
yeah.
related to the capital cost recovery charge, which is, it could be significant if we're doing a lot of projects back to back and the rate adder, they're cumulative. So you do a project, you do a project, you do a project.
All right, but not the actual 2.5 rate
Correct.
structure. There's no flexibility in terms of the management. All right, thank you.
No more solicitor comments?
No.
All right, any public comments before we adjourn? We do not have an executive session, so seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned.
So